here today, Paul Cronin, to talk about succession planning. Paul comes from a very, very dear friend of mine who works on their team of the succession matching community or group, which he'll talk about in a little bit. But again, for those that aren't familiar, here in the Economic Development Club, we meet every Wednesday and every Friday talking about themes and subjects that are important to economic development officers. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you check out Paul's file and Paul's bio, and be sure to follow him because I'm sure he'll be sharing some more expertise in other rooms here on the club itself. And of course, Dan and Laura are other catalysts for this community as well. Be sure to follow them for sure. Now, if you are in here and you're thinking, you know what, this subject would really be super interesting for my colleagues or coworkers, please feel free to use the plus sign below. That'll allow you to invite some folks into the room here. If you know that they're interested but they're not on Clubhouse, send a direct message to myself or Dan Taylor on LinkedIn, and we'll be sure to get them an invite for future sessions as well. For our friends in the audience, if you have a question, feel free to use the hand icon over the notepad. When you press that button, that will raise your hand and allow myself, Lara, or Dan to bring you here up on stage. Welcome Carissa and Jamie, who have just joined the room as well. Once we do bring you up on stage, note that your mic is going to be live, so you want to hit mute as soon as you land on the stage here as well. Welcome, Jamie. Once you do jump on stage, some tips to really get the most out of the experience. So if you have a question, you join us on stage. If you do share something, please know that when you finish, if you say your name and say I'm done speaking, so for example, my name is Bob and I'm done speaking, that allows the other speakers to know when they can chime in as well. And if you hear something when you're on stage and you want to celebrate it, pressing your mic icon really quick on and off indicates applause. So, as speakers and audience members, we love to see that. And if you want to join us on stage and you do have something to share, just like Dan's doing now, if you press the mute icon on and off super slowly, that lets us know you have something you'd like to participate in. And again, if you haven't yet done so, make sure you click on the greenhouse right beside the economic development title on the top. That'll notify you when future events come to pass. So I'm super, super excited today because we have a guest today and we're going to talk about succession planning. The reason why this topic came up was I think, Dan, we've been doing this for about 2 or 3 months, and Lara, you've joined us for the last couple of months as well. One day I remember asking at the end of a session, hey, we're looking for new titles. Who wants to talk about succession planning? And it went nuts. People were really, really excited to hear about this topic because I imagine, especially after everything that's happened over the last year and a half, we're all trying to figure out not only how to support our entrepreneurs and our local Main Street businesses, but we're also probably trying to understand how to help them grow and scale as well. And we're seeing a lot of business owners hitting that retirement age or actually deciding to retire early after what COVID has done to many main streets. And so we want to make sure that we keep that vibrancy in our downtowns and our main streets. And Paul is here to talk about sort of how we can best manage that. So here's what I'm going to do, Paul. I'm going to throw this first question to you. And by the way, Lara and Dan, I know you both as experts as well. So I hope you feel comfortable participating as well. So Paul, my first question is this. When we talk about succession planning and all the work that you've done, what's the number one thing you think economic developers should be aware of when it comes to succession planning?
The number one is lack of preparedness on the part of the business owner. And it's not a function of laziness or ignorance or any of those things, because I've owned 3 companies and I know how hard it is to be a business owner. But in the great scheme of things that a business owner has to focus on day after day, how to get out of the business never seems to make it to the top of the priority list. And so that means that they often run the company without that thought in mind, other than this sort of vague idea that I'd like to leave my business someday. And in fact, there's a LinkedIn group called I think I'll leave my business 5 years from now. It's actually all mostly business brokers who share funny stories about business owners. But regardless, that's the number one issue that I think faces virtually every business owner.
I totally understand that. I totally get it. I'm curious, in your experience with everything that's happened over the past year and a half globally, are we seeing a rise in early retirement? Are we seeing more and more business owners say, you know what, I'm not waiting for a certain age. I think it's time for me now.
The anecdotal evidence is exactly that. There's certainly depends on where you are in the world. In the U.S., which because of the vaccine rollout, that seems to have amplified things. It doesn't necessarily change the answer to the first question, though. So, an interest or desire to leave does not necessarily equate with ability to leave, because that ultimately, your ability to leave your business, other than literally shutting out the lights, of course, is depending on having a transferable, desirable, valuable business.
That's great as well, Paul. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have any, please feel free to click the raise hand button and we'll bring you on stage. So, Paul, let's get into the nitty gritty, the deep question here. And I know this is going to be a big time, but how does a business, how do they start the preparations? They've clicked in their head. It's time for me to make a change. What are those first steps they need to take?
Yeah, the first step is to actually talk to people you trust about it. So if you're married or have a life partner, you better have that conversation first, I suggest. Then speak to your lawyer, and this could be a business lawyer or estate planning lawyer, the case may be. They're going to kick off a whole series of questions. You need to speak to your accountant because they're going to kick off a whole series of questions about taxes and so forth. Assuming you have a financial advisor, you want to talk to them. If you don't have a financial advisor and you're going to be potentially selling a business that's going to result in hundreds of thousands or in some cases millions of dollars, you're going to need some advice about how to do that. So I call, other than your spouse, life partner, who's number one, the other three, the lawyer, the accountant, the financial advisor, are sort of your trifecta of advisors you need to start having conversations with first, because they're essentially going to tell you the unknown unknowns, all right? Because most business owners go into this, with a rather topical knowledge of it.
It makes total sense for sure. Um, I'm curious though. I'm assuming we're looking for people who have some knowledge of succession planning. Succession planning isn't something you can just figure out. I imagine you want a lawyer, an accountant, or someone that has experience in it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so the second part of that is if you lawyer, your accountant hasn't actually helped other business owners do a succession and not just shut down the business, but actually do a succession, you might want to get referrals to someone who does. We have a group of people on our platform for that matter. But the other way, of course, is folks who are listening today, the economic development folks. You have a broad array of people in your network. So certainly reaching out to the local economic development, community futures types folks, and having a confidential conversation with them as well will maybe yield a set of advisors that's more in tune with and more experienced, frankly, in helping a business owner with their transition.
Yes, and for those in the audience, the Community Futures is an organization that exists in, for the most part, rural parts of Canada that facilitates entrepreneurship. And I think Lara, in the U.S., there's a another version of it, and I've forgotten the name of how they define it there.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it either, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's probably probably SBIC, SBIC, Small Business Innovate. Gosh, all right,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah,
SBIC, and this SB's DC as well. So we have a lot of acronyms here down.
centers, but
There
there's
you go.
also a group that works specifically with really micro businesses. I'll come up with a name. Stay
There you
tuned.
go.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful. Jamie, you've just joined us on stage. Before we as we keep peppering Paul with questions, did you want to contribute to the conversation?
Well, sure. And it just seemed like a perfect segue for me to jump in. I run the SBDC for UNLV here in Las Vegas, and we are housed inside the Office of Economic Development. So it's a nice marriage of all these things we're talking about right now. And absolutely, we do have through SBDC networks um, specialists who do advise clients who are on the path for an exit. And when we're doing our business planning, the old adage of plan with the exit in mind is true, and that's the way that we conduct things too. But SBDC is a great resource, and I just wanted to chime in on that. I'm Jamie, and I'm done speaking.
Dan, did you want to add as well? Thank you, Dan. That's amazing. I think your chimes were trying to get into the conversation as well. The more you spoke, the more loud they got. But that's good. That you were talking about Mind Valley, so that was obviously a correlation that was needed. So, Paul, let me come back to you. I want to ask you this question, and Jamie, since I have you on stage, I may bring it back to you as well. But when we're talking about this concept of starting with the end in mind. So, the first question is this idea of, I guess, in the business planning stage, is that the best time to think about succession, or are you thinking about, like, when is the best time to start thinking about succession?
Well, yeah, beginning with the end in mind is great, but I'll say when is the best time to do it versus when it happens. When it happens, I'll start with is usually a triggering event. It's a health crisis, it's a business issue. COVID certainly was a triggering event. And so to avoid those, or if you will, work around those, is, anytime, if you're a business owner over 50, the simple reality is everyone you know is wondering when you're going to leave your business someday. Okay, and I'm 60, so I get it. And so having those first, if you will, baby steps of having that conversation around someone who can help you analyze your business and recognize the holes in the business. Whether it's a business consultant or an accountant or somebody else who can help you look at your business objectively and understand what are the things you need to work on to make it a transferable company, because most businesses really aren't transferable unless somebody else wants to get in and take that business over and replace the owner. And there's a limited number of people who really want to do that because of the risk involved. If too much of the business is depending on there. As someone said earlier, I'm sorry, is making the business less about you is the best way to create value in the business.
Right.
So those are a couple things to think about. I mean, there's a laundry list, and there's entire coaching programs and consulting programs, some of which I've participated in the past and led in the past. But those are things that you can at least start with.
And Paul, I think too, would you agree that it definitely depends on the type of business and whether or not the business owner, when they're starting or through the course of the business, uh, is utilizing it as a paycheck, and as a lifestyle support, or they're using or they're building the business as an independent structure, as a business itself, right? Because if it's just a method to earn income, then a lot of times those business owners aren't necessarily thinking of big picture strategy to get out. It's a lifestyle support vehicle.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. So the vast majority of businesses, and I've been working with small business owners in some regard for 40 years, and I started in college for the record. um, but the vast majority of business, for a remarkably simple reason, they're good at something, they're tired of working for somebody else to do it, so they said, I'm going to go do this on my own and quote control my own destiny. Tradesmen, on and on and on, lawyers, you name it, right on down the line. So you kind of start, and then you are the business, and it's a job. And the difficulty in that is there are a limited number of jobs that can be sold successfully. There can be done, but you also have to, you have to have customers, you have to have relationships, you have to have something that somebody else would really want to buy. I'll give you a very simple example. I know a fellow who quote retired from an airline mechanic, 30 years for working one of the big airlines, so he knew all about engines and so forth, and he wanted a little quote retirement job. And so what he bought was an oil burner repair maintenance business. Oil, for those of you who don't know, in the Northeast, we have some of our older homes are heated with oil, including mine. And so he bought this little business, which was somebody else's job. It's just his. He's busy about 6 or 7 months a year. It's basically the heating season. And he's really happy. He golfs the rest of the year. And he may potentially sell it down the road if there's enough of us left who still have oil burners. But and you can take that, go on from there. But you have to sort of measure like what you're going to get from it. It's an income, and then if there's some capacity, there's a cash flow, there's something you can express to somebody else who wants a job as opposed to a business, then yeah, it's potentially you can turn those. It's in, and you pretty much have to sell them on your own. All right, it's very difficult to get any broker to help you with that. But as you were saying, Jamie, the the bigger piece, if you're going to build something that you want to quote, this is my retirement, which I often hear from business owners, oh, I sell the business, this is my retirement, and they learn the business is only worth a few $100,000. I was talking to somebody yesterday, oh, I'll sell my business for 4 million. I'm like, gee, that sounds pretty good. And he goes, yeah, but that's not going to help me because this is how much money I spend. So, so it is a balancing act.
That's an interesting point, Paul, and maybe that sort of takes us into this next question about valuation. And I know that's not a simple question to answer, but as a business owner, let's say that life event has happened that you talked about, and they realize, you know what, we need to start planning for succession. We're not going to sell tomorrow, but how do we plan? How how do how does a business owner really look at valuation? Is it something as simple as I feel like my business is worth this much, like we see on the folks on Tim's Dan and Shark Tank, where they're
Yeah,
like, yeah,
Jamie and I are laughing, right?
what's up? Or is there actual
so,
process to it?
so, so there's a wonderful meme, and it's called "Bam! Your business is worth $1.5 million." And the fellow who created that meme is a wonderful writer named Mike Finger. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he basically said he's talking to a business owner. He's a coach now, and some said, "I need $1.5 million to retire, so that's what my business is worth." I'm basically, bam, you're right. It's worth 1.5 million. The other joke is, why is your business worth $5 million? And the owner replies, "Because I have 5 daughters." Right? I mean, so that's the disconnect, unfortunately. And I don't mean to be unkind to my fellow business owners. But the reality of the value of your business in most places is a function of the cash flow that it generates, because the cash flow is going to pay the debt service if someone's using debt to buy it. It's going to pay the salary of the person buying it. And for a bigger business, it's going to supply the return on investment for someone who's buying it, on equity. So you've got to generate enough cash flow, profits, whatever you want to call it, EBITDA, so that somebody who is examining your business can say, if I buy that business for X, this is the financial return I can get from it. This is how I can compensate myself. This is how I can accomplish my goals, educating my kids, and maybe someday retiring someday. But getting to that number really requires professional assistance.
Yeah.
Using rules of thumb and so on and so forth. Like when I was a broker for a while, and we'd get these calls. Hi, I own a fence company. A friend of mine sold his fence company, and he said he got 3 times profits. So what do you think mine is worth? And I didn't want to tell him, to be rude. And I say, well, at the moment, I think your business is worthless because I don't know anything about your business. So, there's an honest answer. But people are looking for like a rule of thumb, like, give me a ballpark of your business. But business is not a house, right? I mean, a house, you can go to Zillow and get a ballpark within, 10% plus or minus. That's what your business is worth because there's so many houses for sale and there's so many similarities. But each business really is unique, and you can have 1 times your profits, your EBITDA, to 8 times your profits or 0 times your profits because this business is completely all about you and there's nothing to sell.
And so, Paul, if I might add on to that a little bit, actually. So my background actually is as a certified business valuation analyst. That's what I did for many years before I came into this role. And what I did more often than not was have exactly the scenario you painted, where a business owner would come into the office and is expecting some life event to happen and wants to know the value of the business. It might be a good life event, like they're ready to retire and sell the business. It could be something negative, like they're being sued or they're going through divorce and they've got to split the asset, whatever. But they want to know the value of the business. And um, there isn't necessarily, like you're saying, a hard and fast rule for everything, but there are a lot of structures that exist for calculating values of businesses, given different industries and specialties, and then paring it down through uh, equation to get to something that's proportionate to the size and scope and market of the business that you're trying to value. And one thing that I found really helpful with the clients I was working with that did offer some peace of mind and some ability to sort of grasp onto something tangible was almost breaking down the valuation into a regression. And to make that simple for anyone who's not super familiar with regression analysis, it's taking individual components of any big aggregate calculation and understanding the individual value of that component. So we can take then any business and say, okay, here are all of the factors of value for your business, factors 1 through 12. Let's just look at numbers 1 and 2 and 3, see if we can modify those over whatever the time frame is. Like if you've got 6 or 9 months to sell your business, and you know that if you put a manager in place and now you have some autonomy in the business as opposed to it depending on you, that compared to other businesses out there, that increases the value or the attractiveness of that business to a potential buyer by, I don't know, let's say, 20% or something. I'm just picking a number now. We would base that obviously in some other analytics for looking at on sale prices, but we would then say, okay, we want to increase by 20%. Let's make sure over 60 days or 6 months, we're putting a manager in place to handle all those things so we can see that result in value. Or perhaps there's a problem with the marketing program and they don't have an independent marketing system, or the website's lacking in some way. And whatever it is, we can really take individual points and drill down on those and understand how they're affecting the big picture value, particularly from the perspective of a potential buyer, and then create or move your business to look more like what someone wants to buy out there. And that's on a really micro level, right? For an individual buyer of what we like to call like the mom and pop, size of a business. On the same token, If you're building something that's big and you're expecting it to be bought by a much larger company, you want to sell up into somebody synchronous to you. Similarly, you'll want to understand the value points that matter to that buyer and shape your business as you're planning it and building it to match what they're looking to buy. And if you can do that and hit those value points, then you're creating an asset that's really worth something that you can sell with tangible metrics. And so that's kind of a method and a technique that I've used in the past that's been pretty successful at trying to understand the components of value and then changing the value for someone as they're getting ready to sell. I'm Jamie. I'm done speaking.
Jamie, thank you. Paul, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, that was outstanding. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, there's a whole science, behind valuation, and anyone who does it will tell you it is somewhat scientific, but it's also an art. But there's comps, which is one value. Looking at it, there's discounted cash flow, which is sort of getting into a little bit of what Jamie. There's building the value of your business, understanding what are the drivers of it. There's the different expressions around value drivers and business drivers, enterprise value drivers, and so forth. But if you can identify those things and work on those for some period of time, even if it's a period of months, as Jamie was saying, that can have a really tangible value. That can go from 1x to 2x, and that could be, saying, well, your business is worth 300,000 versus 600,000. 600,000 sounds better to me. But there's a lot to get around there. But the biggest challenge that I've seen is if you're sort of tired of your business, or for the development officers, if you're getting a sense that the person is tired of the business, telling them, they say, I'm sorry, you're tired of the business. I'm glad you're thinking about exiting. And oh, by the way, I have good news for you. You have to work harder in order to sell your company. It's a tough conversation. And so then you get into, well, if I don't do that, what are my options? And then, you have to have honest conversations with people about, well, these in fact are your options, which sometimes means staying in the business and doing the hard work for a long time. And sometimes it means accepting a lot less and moving on and finding a platform process by which you can get out of the business in some form, that allows you to do what you need to do, depending on what the trigger is that's bringing this up.
Right. And then have you ever, Paul, also seen that as somebody jumps in to change the value in anticipation of an exit, that they fall back in love with their business? I have definitely seen that as well.
Yeah, it's in fact this conversation I just had with somebody, and this was triggered by the estate planning conversation. Right, this is how it happens. The estate planning lawyer calls me, say, Paul, I think I've got somebody you need to talk to. So we go and we meet, and talked about his business, and he's like, Paul, I only work 2 or 3 days a week. This is what I make, and I'm sitting there saying, what the heck do you want to sell for, right? And so he gets through the whole process. He says, but this is my age, and there's other things I want to do, and there's people here that I know that they would like to take on the business, but they don't have the money. So he kind of went through the entire smorgasbord, right, of how you think through the exiting your business. And so I said, well, listen, let me give you some resources. This is how our platform works. You can sell your business, not pay a sales commission, etc. Da 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 da. But it's not for everybody. But you do have to still do some work. He thought about all that, and I called him back, and he said, I talked to my head of sales, and business is doing really well, and we may hang on to this for a year or two. And I kind of chuckled, and I didn't say anything, but it's a conversation of money now versus money later, right? The value of money. You would know this, Jamie. And so the best time to sell your company is when it's doing phenomenal. Okay, because that's the easiest way to find a buyer. Now there's a way to capture both sides, of what we call getting 2 bites of the apple. You don't have to sell 100% of your company. You could sell 70% of your company. You're no longer in control of the business, but you could at least get some money off the table and work a deal with the buyer where you're going to stay on under contract for some period of time, maybe training up, finding replacement. That individual, let's say your business is worth $2 million, and they're saying, great, I'll give you 70% of $2 million, and you'll take a small equity stake, you'll retain a small equity stake, we're going to grow the business together, for 2 to 3 years, and then I'm going to buy you out. Or you could conversely buy that person out. Or your wonderful VP of sales could turn around and say, I love this business, I'm going to buy both of you out, or some iteration of there. And it is an option, particularly for someone as you're getting into your 60s and 70s, because the simple reality is there's regression analysis in business, and unfortunately there's regression analysis in our human bodies. And so, it does sometimes make sense to take some cash off the table and then trade that off and get some growth. You get less of the growth than later, but it's a lot less risky than saying, I'm going to grow the heck out of the business, I'm going to borrow money, I'm going to drive it, and then all the risk is on you. And then some other shoe drops that you can't imagine right now. And now the growth story has ended, the problems are there, maybe you've taken on more debt, and oh, by the way, you're 2 or 3 years older. So it's always a trade-off. It's every choice is a risk.
Paul, thank you. Thank you. That's phenomenal. I just want to take a moment and reset the room really quick and then throw it back to Dan because I know Dan has some amazing thoughts to share here as well. Welcome, everybody, again to the Economic Development, the EcDev Network Clubhouse Club. We're glad to have you here. Today, we're talking about succession planning, and our featured speaker, Paul Cronin, is here to share some thoughts on succession. And we're really lucky that Jamie Swartz has jumped on stage, and I had no idea Jamie had a background in valuation. So we've got some amazing thoughts that are being shared here as well. Now, if you just joined us in the room or if you're just listening to us on the podcast, just be aware that the session is being recorded today. I forgot to mention that a little bit earlier because, as I said, Dan is amazing at leveraging this as a podcast for future as well. In the audience, our friends, if you have any questions, you can use that hand icon over the notepad to press it. And once you do, that'll notify myself, Lara, or Dan to bring you on stage and to ask that question, or just share some thoughts if you're interested as well. Once you do that, your mic will be live. So just be sure to hit your mute as soon as you jump on stage. And when you're ready to share, just slowly press your mic on and off to let us know. And if you hear something on stage that you really love, hitting the mic on and off super fast indicates applause. I'm doing an abridged version of our reset today because we have a lot of amazing info to share. We've only got 20 minutes left. So what I'd love to do now is, Dan, before I throw it to you, Paul, really quick, because I want to make sure we don't miss this. I want to know about how succession matching works with economic development officers. Perhaps you could talk about your example with Simcoe County and the work that you do in that region.
Yeah, so I'll start with the premises. This is not my particular area where I spend all my time because I tend to spend it here, but the company really has built its business around working with the various economic development partners, as we call them, across the country, where we're able to help them understand how to leverage our knowledge and our experience. And in some cases, their business owners are able to purchase what we call coupon codes through the development office, and they redeem them on our program, and it allows them to do some succession planning and then list the business for sale confidentially and then find a buyer. So there's a short answer to that.
That's amazing. Thank you. That's a wonderful share. Dan, can I invite you to participate in the discussion at this point?
So, just so I can clarify what you're wondering, are you wondering how they're arriving at the valuation for the very early stages of funding? Sure. Sure. Yeah. And I would say one of the biggest strategies that we're seeing are taking a look at whether or not you've got an idea, particularly in tech startups, who would be the likely buyer for you if you're looking to sell up, or if you know of VCs and equity firms that have portfolios that would, that your product would be synchronous to. Um, Having those kind of things identified up front is really awesome, and not everybody does, but a lot of people really do, and they kind of know who they're building their niche technology or niche product for. And in that case, it's actually very simple, because you can just model all of your metrics and all of the benchmarks in your planning to kind of mirror or satisfy what that ultimate buyer or partner, funding partner, is looking for. And that's really just if the play is purely, I'm building something to sell it, right? And that's not, a passion, that you're building something that you love. For people who have built something and are not necessarily on that strategic a path, um, we shop it around, of course, to some really friendly funding partners in the very beginning of something, once we think somebody's ready to go for funding. And we just start identifying where are the holes, and where are they not maybe matching up to who are comparable investments or comparable um, technologies or products, and filling those holes that way. The Oh boy, there was a really great example, but I just realized as I'm talking that I probably ought to refrain from it, because I might say something I'm not supposed to say about their technology. But we just recently had a really great example of this come forward, where the company structured itself really in the image of where it was designed to land. And it didn't end up getting picked up by who we thought was going to be the prospective buyer, but the buy came from a group that was actually looking to buy the buyer we had in mind. And we had just set it up so nicely that it became a really synchronous purchase. So um, the objectives and the important factors for who you're looking to sell to are probably the most important things.
Well, yeah, I mean the two are you talk to a strategic buyer, which is somewhat in alignment with what Jamie was saying. Strategic and industry buyer. Let's say you're an HVAC company, HVAC company, and you're doing $1 million a year. There's two ways you can find a way to be sold or be purchased by an HVAC company that's on growth track and they're rolling up, or you could also sell to a private equity company that is looking for HVAC companies, and there are companies that do that. There are hundreds of these boutique private equity companies. We're talking about 35 or so. We've got about a dozen on our platform now, and we essentially become the matchmaker. We're not the broker, because we're an online platform, but we allow the private equity people to have a communication at a different level outside of the algorithm with the sellers, but it's based on specific criteria. Here's the acquisition criteria of the private equity company or the strategic buyer, and here's what the target, if you will, what are the opportunities that the seller offers, and if we see that there's overlap that might work, then we can put them together. And our platform is one way to do it, and we think we're great at it. But of course, there are others. And then, of course, you can always hire a mergers and acquisition advisor to do that as well. But you'll be paying anywhere from 5 to 10% of the selling price to them for their services.
It seems like more and more, at least in what I'm observing out here, there are more opportunities to sell up into a private equity or some kind of a portfolio holding company than individual private buyers, at least over the last 5 years. That's what I've been noticing. And I, just from my reading, I think that it is because there were more entrepreneurs in the demographic that's ready to sell now than there are available buyers. And so, in order to protect some supply chain issues and things like that, companies were coming in and buying the critical factors and adding to the portfolio. And so, that's, for instance, to make sure that the down the line, the nuts and bolts all get produced and not lost as somebody who's aging out of their business and sells it just shuts it down, and now that's no longer a manufacturing piece in that line. Are you seeing the same thing, Paul? That's the biggest buyer out there, or are you still seeing a lot of activity and small purchase from private buyers?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So private buyers, their biggest challenge, and I'll speak for Canada, is financing. And it's asset-based lending fundamentally in Canada. So if you're buying $1 million business and there's $600,000 of assets, you've got to come up with 400 grand. Right. In the U.S., we have the Small Business Administration. You can do a cash flow lending through them. Banks love to do SBA loans all day long. If they're not, if the business's cash flow is strong enough, you can do there. But once you get beyond that $1 million, there's just a limited number of individual buyers who can kind of go there. And so if you're talking about a lower middle market company that's worth $2, $3, $5 million, you're really, for the most part, not talking to an individual buyer. You're talking to a strategic buyer company who's much larger, or you're talking to a private equity who, these are professional buyers. This is what they do, and they're looking for you to either, if you're big enough, let's say you're a 10 or $20 million company, they want you to be their platform, right? You're their platform HVAC company, you're their platform IT services business, and then they're going to what they call bolt-on $1 million acquisitions, or even $500,000 acquisitions if it's the right fit, as the case may be. But I just see that happening over and over again. In my personal opinion, I have no data behind this, is I think every private equity company envisions themselves as the next Berkshire Hathaway, right? Which is how Warren Buffett sort of built his, right? He started a little higher up, buying a much bigger company, but that's ultimately how that business was built, is private equity, and ultimately then becoming a public company of private companies. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No. We appreciate that. That's awesome. Thank you, Paul. And Dan and Jamie, thank you for that great question and that great insight as well. That's awesome. Paul, before I know, I'm sure Lara has a question, and we've kept her mostly silent, but I want to throw a question out there really quick that we've sort of touched on. And again, for economic development officers, I think it's good to know. But is there a business that can take advantage of succession? So let me clarify that. As I hear Jamie sharing some of her knowledge and you sharing some of your experience, immediately my head thinks about franchises or particular home-based businesses. What makes what would prevent a business, let's say, from
Back to the first thing, a business can only transfer, replicate the seller's results. The financial results, the customer results, the production results. If they don't feel they can replicate that, the risk is too high and they'll move on to the next business. And so if you have a business where you can prove that a buyer can replicate your results for whatever financial return they're seeking, right? Income, this, that, what have you, then you've more likely than not, you've got a transferable company. And so that's the first place to really start. I don't know if Jamie has a different take on it, but that's where I always start with. And if you've got that, you've got the foundation to move forward with all of the other elements that we spoke about.
Thank you, Paul. Jamie, I know this is unexpected. Could I invite you as well to maybe provide some insights on that question? Have you ever seen a business model that really can't take advantage of succession plans?
Well, I think one of the most challenging things, and we've really hit on it quite a bit here, but when the business is based on an individual or something that is really specific that can't be transferred, that's obviously the most difficult thing to move. And so, and we just see a lot of that, especially in the private space. So taking some time, especially if someone anticipates that they will want to leave their business at some point and they believe that it's an actual asset and not just an income vehicle, then spending, as much as 2 3 years ahead of time. That's a long time. A lot of people don't think that far in advance, but if you could even get a year ahead of time to think about how to create more autonomy in the business and have it be less dependent on them individually, that just makes such a world of difference.
Thank you, Jamie. That's super helpful. Paul, sorry, did you want to continue?
No, I think those are great points. And even if you're, you say, I've got to sell my business in 6 months sort of a thing, right then at that moment when you've made that emotional, leap, if you will, is start with the premise of what can I do to make my business more transferable, more desirable in 6 months? If that's all you've sort of given yourself for whatever reason, you're leaving the country or whatever. And so if you think of like, what does my marketing engine look like? What does my sales engine look like? What does production engine look like? Any of those elements and anything you can do to improve those things, improve the likelihood of you having transferability. You don't want to end up like the poor fellow who, had the shoe store, third generation. This is a true story. Who somehow he ended up on my email list when I was a broker, and he's like, "Oh, I've got your letter, Paul." And God only knows when he got this letter, and I'm ready to sell now. Well, he's trying to sell his business in the middle of COVID, all right, when he's not even open, right? Or the pizza shop owner who called me one day and said, "Well, I closed the business 2 months ago. Do you think I could sell it now?" And I'm like, "No." You're not open for business. Now, those are extreme examples, and COVID threw everything, kind of 52 card pickup, if you will. But, as Jamie said, great things can be done. Great results can happen if you're willing to take the time. You can still get good results if you're willing to take some time. But if you don't make any efforts, that's probably, you're not going to get the results that you are hoping for.
And I was thinking of something else, Paul, that you might have some experiences with this as well. But when I'm thinking of things that are difficult to transact, and when there is family or friends who have been in the business together, and that's part of the transition or exit, that can be very sticky and difficult. Particularly, I've seen a lot of like passing the business on to the children. Children sometimes don't even want the business, and the parents are forcing it on them, and they're taking it on out of obligation and guilt, or some sort of, family and cultural pressure that they're feeling to continue the business, but it's not what they really want. Or partners who go in on something together, and then ultimately it doesn't end up being an equitable partnership, and one person wants out, or two people want out, and they want to move another person out of the picture. And that can be difficult to do as well, or just when people don't agree on how things should go. So, an important thing that I talk to people about all the time, kind of revisit this idea of starting with the end in mind. Uh, Something that mitigates the trouble in those cases is a great operating agreement. And it gets neglected an awful lot in the setup and establishment of the organization, but it's so critical to avoid all of the messy conflicts, particularly as you're trying to exit and who gets what and who was responsible for what. But when you have friends and family especially involved, and that happens a lot with small business, and as we exit, those really clearly defined operating agreements come in real handy. So that seemed like a good point to bring up right now.
No, I would agree completely. Family, anytime you've got family in a business, it, as you say, it really makes a transition sticky, particularly for an outside buyer. And as a fellow I've known for a number of years, we happen to share a birthday, which is a funny coincidence. And he took over the second generation, business. I think it was in the printing industry, and he had family in the business, but he knew that the only way to get liquidity for the family in totality and to frankly keep the business going in the industry was to package it up and sell it. Fortunately, the father had the presence to know that this particular son, who I don't even think was the oldest, had the business savvy. He happened to go to business school. Not that that means anything, but and he took that decision, and the business was able to successfully transfer and continue as part of another entity. But there were some family members. It was a very bumpy ride, and he said, "Yeah, we had some awkward Thanksgivings for a while, but eventually the family members came to understand the decision." But if you're not ready, if you're not up for that ride, then selling your company outside of family is going to be, pretty tough.
Paul, thank you for that insight, and Jamie, wonderful, wonderful question. I'm just being mindful of time because I know we do have a hard stop at 1. So, Lara, I may miss your question. I'm so sorry, but I just want to make sure that anyone in the audience that has any last-minute questions, if they want to ask, they can do it now. But what I would love to pose to the speakers on stage, I'm going to aim this towards Paul and Jamie especially, is what's that one first step as economic development officers that we can take to start really helping our main streets and our business owners plan for succession? Do you have any advice on what's one action we could take? Paul, can I start with you?
Perhaps you can just say, number one, how's it going? Right? And, when you think about your business, what do you think about the future of your business over the next few years? What would you like your business to be? And that can open up, an threatening, non-threatening, if you will, way of having them talk about personally, as I like to say, what are you really trying to accomplish?
That's a great prompt, Paul. I love that. Jamie, again, I hope you don't mind. I'm throwing it to you. Can I ask you, in your experience, when you think about valuation, what's the first step as that we take to really start those conversations?
Well, that is a good question. And actually, because referencing what we were talking about before, when you ask somebody what they think the value of their company is versus maybe what it really is, there's usually a differential there. And so I actually would ask people, what do you want the value of your business to be, or what is your objective for value, and what's the time frame for that? And if they have an answer to that that's firm, usually it's not a dollar amount, but it's more of a vision. Like, well, I hope I can sell this thing to so and so or to such and, for a lot of money or whatever. And then from there, we can pare it down into something that's realistic and has measurable goals to get them where they want to go. And sometimes we have to talk about how realistic the goal is, but I really kind of shoot pie in the sky with them to see what ultimately is their dream for this and see if we can't build somewhat of a plan to achieve that.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And I want to thank our audience for sticking to the end here and those listening onto the podcast. Paul, thank you so much for coming. We really, really appreciate so much that you've shared. And Jamie, our magician that just appeared, a wonderful, wonderful in helping facilitate the conversation. Thank you so much. For those that aren't aware, we do have another session coming up this Friday. Lara, I'm really quickly trying to get to our calendar, but maybe I can ask you what our topic is for Friday.
So this Friday, we're going to talk strategic planning. And Kyle Talente, who is a consultant with RKG Associates, is going to tell you what does your consultant want you to know about your strategic plan. So looking forward to that conversation.
Thank you, Lara. Wonderful. So we'll see all of you here in the EcDev Network Club at 3 p.m. on Friday. Thank you once again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye now.